Hey YouTubers, so I've been running the 203 505s Flo-Tek small block forged cylinder heads on my Mustang for about 3 years now, and I wanted to share with you a couple things that I've run into now that I've decided to kind of take them down and see what I have going on. Initially I tore these heads down because I wanted to right some wrongs that I did the first time around and just double check a couple things, fix a coolant leak that I had developed. And when I did this, there were two problems that came up. And the first one I'm not going to blame on the heads, it was more of my fault. But the second one is going to be something that you guys are going to want to have to take a look at. So first things first, I ended up having some valves hitting some pistons. Yeah, not good. So what happened is when I checked valve to piston clearance, when I set the preload on the lifters, there's no oil in the lifters. So what was happening is actually when I was coming up on the valve with the rocker arm and pushing it open, it was actually collapsing the lifter before it actually started opening the valve just because of the spring pressure. So it was giving me a false reading, and what ended up happening is the valve reliefs in my pistons weren't big enough, or at least they weren't in the right spot. They're Speed Pro forged pistons. I'll pop the part number up on here, but basically what was happening is they were just touching on the intake side of the intake valve as it was opening. And I noticed this when I took the engine apart, is there were little eyebrows actually effectively dented into the piston right above the valve relief. So I took the heads to the machine shop and decided to have them, well, I ended up going to my machine shop and telling him what happened. He said we better check those valves and replace them if you can afford it, because even if they've had the slightest amount of contact with the piston, there's a possibility that there could have been weakening or cracking in the where the stem meets the head of the valve right here. And so we ordered up some valves. I actually ended up putting some Faria, I believe is what you call them, Faria F5059 valves in it, and those are 1.94 inch valves. I had talked about the possibility of putting 202 valves, 2.02 inch valves in it, and just the way the chamber is set up on it and how deep the valves are in the combustion chamber, it would have shrouded the valve so much, and the throat of the port underneath the valve was so much smaller that I would have had to remove a bunch of material and reshape the whole throat, and then it would have effectively, the chamber would have shrouded the larger valve so much that I probably would have lost flow. So we decided to stay with the 1.94 inch valve. Now while the heads were at the machine shop, we ran into the second issue, and what I think is a problem with inferior or low quality parts used with this valve, or with these cylinder heads. And I will say that these valves actually held up with being hit and everything. They were actually still straight, and I had no indication that something was going wrong. There may have been some noise that I maybe foolishly attributed to roller lifters, but the valves held up just fine. Did they need to be replaced? Maybe not, but it's cheap insurance. I got the valves for $100 for a set. If I would have dropped the valve, it would have ruined most of the bottom end, so it wasn't worth it to me to take that chance, so I just replaced them. But the second thing that they found is the valve springs. They checked the valve springs, and when I initially had these heads checked out by my machine shop, they were at 100 pounds at the seat, installed at 1.875 inches. That's the installed height. And then and we got a train going on right now, but at 510 lift, 0.510, they were at 260 pounds. When they checked them when they checked them, when I brought the heads in, we only had about 3,000 miles on these heads, and they were struggling to get 80 pounds at the seat. And you might be able to see this here. Let me get the camera in a better position, but you can actually see the height difference. This valve spring here is about 65 thousandths shorter than this valve spring, and they wouldn't have been able to shim this spring up enough to make enough seat pressure. And the problem with that is with 3,000 miles, they felt that was unusual, to say the least. We'll put it that way. So I ended up getting some valve springs through them. It's the company that I actually ordered them through is called well, actually I didn't order them, they did. JPW, it's a Jobber Parts Warehouse. I think they're just a distributor for a bunch of different companies. They're located in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and I think these are a Comp Cams Reeboks. This part number was a VS-500. I spoke with my machine shop essentially, and they said they haven't had any issues with these springs. So I decided to go with them. I can't remember the price on them. I think they were like 80 bucks, but I had them spec them all out. These actually ended up being 110 pounds at 1.85 installed height, and then 270 pounds at 510 lift. So they worked out well. I also had them check the valve guides because the valves were hitting the pistons. I want to make sure I didn't have a valve guide cracked, and they actually found that the valve guides were worn on one of the cylinder heads. The other cylinder head worked spec'd out perfect, but all the intake guides on one cylinder head were worn completely out of spec. He said at 3,000 miles it was unheard of. So I don't know if it was from inferior materials, or they were installed wrong, or the tolerances weren't followed, or if what happened is because the piston was hitting the valve constantly, it was actually tipping the valve like this and forcing it against the seat every single time it went up and down, and actually wore like an egg shape into the guide. So the jury's out on that one. I don't know what caused it, but they replaced it with new ones, and or at least give you an update so you can kind of make a informed decision. Maybe if you want to buy these heads bare and fill them with your own performance, spec valves and valve springs and stuff like that. I would at least suggest doing a valve spring upgrade on them to maybe something a little higher quality. But as far as the valves and everything else went, I think what they come with is sufficient. If you guys got any questions, definitely shoot me something down in the comments. I'd be happy to answer anything. If I forgot any information that you're curious about, I'm sure I have it documented somewhere. So yeah, thanks for watching, and have a good day.